Number 1. I'm a 23-year-old guy and just recently started my first job. You may be wondering why this is my first job if I'm 23. Well, that's because since I was 16 years old, I took care of my grandmother who had COPD, so I had no time to really commit to a job, as if I ever left her alone, she'd be forced into a nursing home, and I could never let that happen. So I made the choice to put my life on hold until the time came when I'd be able to commit to a job. My grandmother recently passed away, so I was now able to get a steady job to get some money to pay bills and such. I applied for a job at my local video rental store, and I got the job pretty quickly, as the manager really took a liking to me. I was trained within a week and put into the night shift. Now, our night shifts aren't anything crazy. They're pretty dead, as a matter of fact. You'll get the occasional customer who will walk in, get a movie, and be on their way. You sometimes get those creeps who come in for the adult movies at 9 p.m. and such, but nothing too crazy. That is until 2 weeks into my working at this store that the most scariest thing happened to me. I came into work around 7 p.m., which was my usual time to work. I'd work until 10 or 11 p.m. given which day it would be. Once I got there, I did my usual routine with my coworker who worked the shift before me of counting the drawers, getting any info they needed me to have, and then they'd leave. I had got probably about 1 hour into my shift, which made it 8 p.m. now, when a man walked through the door with his hood over his head. Anytime someone came in, I'd always say hello, and most would reply back saying hello or give some kind of gesture. But this guy didn't. In fact, it was as if he completely ignored me and just walked off into the store to a corner where I could barely see him. Now, let me give you a little detail about the conditions for when this took place, as it fits into the story. It was January, and it was cold out. So the man had a heavy jacket on which covered him up pretty well. His hood covered his face enough to where I could barely make it out at first. All I could see when he looked my way was the white of his eyes as they looked at me. Eventually he made his way to where I could completely see him fully, as he had taken his hood down from his head. Now, I'm not a guy who gets creeped out often, but when I see this guy, I immediately felt uneasy. He was a black man in his mid-30s with short cropped hair. He had what looked to be a scar on his cheek along with tattoos all over his neck. He glanced at me as I was looking at him, and his eyes met mine. I can't begin to explain how creeped out I was by this. I simply looked down at my computer and pretended it hadn't affected me, even though I know he knew it did. Eventually I glanced back up to see the man was now approaching me at the front counter. In my head, I just wanted to check this guy out and get him out of there, as I was getting more uncomfortable the longer he was there, as it was just him and I in the store at the time. As he approached, I could see his face much more clearer now. He had no expression on his face, but his eyes looked at me as if he had hate towards me. He slammed his movie on the counter with a gesture of intimidation. I was a bit thrown off as I didn't know this guy or why he was acting this way towards me. I slowly leaned up from my computer and stumbled out the words, "Is there something wrong, sir?" I was so creeped out, I didn't even realize how shaky and uneasy my voice was. It sounded as if I was so scared by him that I could barely even get a word out. The man just looked at me for what felt like forever before replying,
"I want to rent this movie, but I need you to do one thing for me."
At this point, I just wanted the guy out of my store, so I replied back with, "What would that be, sir?" Now, my store has very specific rules on what to do when a person seems hostile towards you, so I was already planning out the plan I would put into motion in my head if it got to that point. The man looked me over a couple of times, making me feel very uneasy, before he slowly leaned forward. As he spoke, his breath hit my face. It smelled of weed, alcohol, and like he hadn't brushed his teeth in forever.
"I want you to give me all of the money you have there in that register."
I immediately froze where I stood as the man slammed a gun down onto the counter and pointed it at me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest and ears. I began to shake and I could feel sweat rolling down my forehead. I didn't dare move. I didn't even raise my hands as I didn't want him to think I was trying anything. I felt myself struggle to get any words out before I finally did. "Take all that you want. It's in the drawer in front of me. You can get it so you know I won't do anything." He grinned a nasty yellow smile at me before slowly making his way around the counter to the register. I then stepped back as he pulled it open and began filling in his pockets with the money. Now, I'm not stupid. I know working a night shift always leaves the chance of something like this happening, and I've heard plenty of horror stories about this type of stuff happening to others, which is why I always carry a large pocket knife on me at all times. I slowly slid my hand down into my left pocket and grabbed my knife tightly in my hand. So tight my hand went numb. As the man turned around, he then looked at me before pointing the gun back at me. I just knew he wasn't going to let me go. I'd seen his face, and this seemed like the type of guy who didn't want anything left behind that could tie back to him. All I could think was, this is where I was going to die. Right here, on the floor of this video rental store I called my first job. He inched closer to me and began to speak slowly.
"Now, you know you're not going to get out of this place tonight, right? This is where you're going to die."
Hearing those words made my heart stop and what felt like ice go through my body. I knew I only had one chance to make it out, and I was waiting for that moment. Here it was. I flicked the knife out and jumped towards the man. I then stabbed him in his side beneath his ribs as hard as I could. He fell back and screamed in pain as I twisted it before kicking the man in his leg. He fell to the floor, and I ran from the store to my car as fast as I could without falling on the ice that covered our parking lot. I got into my car and started it as fast as I could. I glanced back and saw that the man was trying to get up from the floor and out of the store to catch me. I slammed on my gas and got the hell out of there. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the man, standing there watching as I sped away. Once I was far enough away, I called the police. Of course, once they got there, the man was gone. There was blood all over the floor behind the counter where he fell after being stabbed. My knife was laying on the floor next to the blood. The police asked me questions, took what they needed, and then had me go to their station to do a sketch of the man. I gave the best description that I could, and then they thanked me and sent me home. About a week later, I got a call from the police who told me they found the man after a person who lived near our store said they'd seen him a few nights later creeping around the back portion of our store where our back door leads out to the garbage bin. They had him in custody. With that, I no longer needed to worry about him. I still work at the store to this day. My coworkers hail me as a hero and brave, but I don't feel that way. I've never been so scared in my life. I always kept thinking to myself, what reasons could he have to want to come back? I don't know. All I can say is maybe he was coming back to finish the job. Maybe he was coming back for me. I really hope that my story can help someone out there, and hopefully be aware of others, and to always be safe. Number 2. I thought that I would share one of the times someone tried to follow me. I'm an 18-year-old female, but at the time I believe I was 17. I drive a 2002 Honda Civic. It's had the engine and transmission repaired, so it's been through a lot and at times not the best for speeding up quickly. To better explain this, there's an intersection down the road from my house. Once you start going past the intersection, it bottlenecks into one lane. It was dark at the time, and I was on my way to the gym. It took me a good 15 minutes to get to the gym from my house. I was in the right lane, meaning I'd have to merge over into the left. The light turns green and we start going. I put my blinker on like normal and speed up gradually to try and get in. Now before this, I'd seen a Jeep Wrangler. It was purple and had super tinted windows. It was in the left lane right before the light changed. I don't know why, but when I had seen the Jeep, I got a strange feeling. So merging in, someone behind me in the left lane was being a butthole and tried not to let me in. Lo and behold, it was the Jeep. So I decided to cut in front of him because at this point, had I not, he would have ran me off the road. So he flashed his brights and I flipped him off. I mean, seriously, it's really not that big of a deal to let someone in front of you anyway. Not a couple of seconds after, I then got the gut feeling he was following me. In situations like this, I freak out immediately. Something I've been trying to work on, but as a 17-year-old 5'0" female driving alone at night on a back road, it's pretty scary. Anyway, so I take out my phone and I call the police, and by this time I'm crying and shaking because I don't know what the person in the Jeep wants. They aren't tailgating me, but they're making every turn that I make now, and my instinct told me they were following me. So I'm on the phone telling the operator what my car looks like and what's going on, all while crying and trying to remain calm. Now, this is where I royally messed up. I shouldn't have done this, but I wasn't thinking, and I've learned from this mistake. Please, don't ever do what I did in this moment. I turned into a dark neighborhood without any streetlights, and the Jeep followed me. I pulled off behind a car and watched as the Jeep sat in the middle of the road, before they then turned into a driveway and then backed out, leaving the neighborhood. Shortly after, a cop pulled up behind me, and my dad arrived. Now, I know this story wasn't the most scary thing, but to me it still is. Learn from my mistake, and please don't do what I did. Go somewhere public. Call the police as soon as you get the feeling something is weird. It may just save your life one day. Number 3. For as long as I can remember, I've been pretty interested in the paranormal. I have one instance that has always boggled my mind, and I thought this was the perfect place to share my story. Around the time this story took place, I was in 8th grade, and my sister was in 6th grade. My sister's parents and I were living with my grandparents, my dad's parents. My grandma had told my sister and I that when my dad was young, this house was haunted. She said she would hear footsteps walk down the hallway and stop in front of her room. Even my dad remembered and said he would see a strange figure in his room. My grandma claimed that once her dad died, the activity stopped. So I'm not sure if this has anything to do with what my sister and I experienced. Anyways, my cousin was visiting at my grandma's house and she was telling my sister and I the story of La Llorona, the weeping woman who lost her kids and now cries and looks for them, or something close to that. We heard this story many times, so this was nothing new. A little later, my cousin went home and everyone went to bed. It was the weekend, so we didn't have to get up early for anything, so no alarms were set. But around 7 in the morning, I heard the loudest cry/scream I have ever heard in my life. I'm a light sleeper, so it was no surprise that I woke up, but I was shocked when my sister shot up at the same time as me and turned on the light and looked at me. She's a very deep sleeper and could sleep through anything. I pulled the blanket off of me because I thought maybe my dog was hurt. He was fine. My sister and I then looked at each other and asked each other, "Did you hear that?" We were both freaked out and went to ask if anyone else heard it. Everyone was still asleep. Mind you, this house wasn't that big. It only has 3 rooms and they were all very close to each other. The scream was so loud, there was no way no one else heard it. My sister and I both agreed that the scream sounded like it was in our heads, and we also agreed that we've never heard anything like that before. It's been around 10 years since this happened, and we sometimes bring it up from time to time, and the story remains the same. I can still to this day clearly hear it, and it gives me the chills. I would love an explanation. I know this isn't that scary of a story, but to me and my sister, this experience is very strange, especially because we've never found an explanation and we know this wasn't just a normal scream. We sometimes wonder if the story my cousin told us about La Llorona had anything to do with the scream we heard. I guess we'll never really know though. Number 4. I'm a 32-year-old female, and this is something that happened to me only 2 nights ago. My husband Kevin and I were on the porch smoking a cigarette. It was about 9 o'clock at night. We live far out in the woods right off of a stretch of highway that's between two interstate exits. We were looking up at the stars and enjoying the quiet atmosphere of the crickets, glad to have a temporary relief from all of the usual traffic noise. I heard something and shushed my husband, even though he hadn't said anything. Was that screaming? I thought to myself. Yes, it was a woman screaming like nothing I had ever heard before. It sounded like she was getting murdered. In between blood-chilling screams, she was screaming out, "Help me," over and over. I look at my husband and we're both really freaked out. The more she screamed, the closer she was getting to the house. I could eventually see a figure running along the median of the highway, making their way closer to the part of the highway that was in front of our house. Our house is a good ways back from our driveway, but not far enough that you can't see anything. If we could see her, that meant she could see us. I'd also like to add that we have no yard security lights. Stupid, I know. So we were in complete darkness. We could still see the highway perfectly fine due to the house across from us who still had their Christmas lights up. I threw my cigarette in my yard and back up to stand in the doorway of the house, pulling out my phone to call 911. She's still in the median of the road, screaming. If anyone else in the surrounding houses heard her, they pretended like they didn't. Kevin runs past me inside to get on his jacket and shoes. I tell him not to go out there, but he ignores me and gets dressed anyway. As soon as he's out of sight, I see a red car barrel up the road and pull over next to where the lady was at. With her in the median, there was still a stretch of highway between them. There was a man driving, but I couldn't see what he looked like. I only heard his voice. He was yelling that he was going to kill her and calling her some bad names. It looked like he was throwing stuff at her out of the window. Maybe clothes? I'm not sure. As soon as she sees him pull over, she starts running straight towards our yard. By that time, I was already on the phone with the police officers, but as I said, I live out in the woods, pretty far out of town I'll add, so it would take them a bit to get there. I yell for my husband. I tell my 9-year-old son to go in our room where the baby is and close the door. He can hear the whole thing and was pretty frightened. My husband runs out into the porch and into the yard towards her. He asks if she's okay, and she then says that she had gotten a ride home from this guy, and halfway down the road he started acting really creepy. He refused to let her out where she told him to and kept driving with her in the car. She looked behind her seat, pretending to look at a car behind them, and saw a roll of duct tape in the back seat. Fearing for her life, she jumped out of the moving car and just started running down the road screaming for help. Kevin starts to lead her towards the house and by now is also on the phone calling the police, having gathered more information that I wasn't able to give them when I had called. They told him to stay on the line with them until an officer showed up. We let her in the house and her face looks terrible. Her face is red and she's bleeding in a couple of spots, road rash from where she had jumped out. She also said that he had hit her before she was able to escape. She came in the house and we locked our door, knob, deadbolt, and chain. We stood together near the windows waiting for the police to show up. Kevin giving updates and answering questions on the phone. No, they haven't gotten here yet. Yes, his car is still parked across the highway. It's a red sedan in front of a house with a lot of blue porch Christmas lights, he told them. I was trying not to lose my crap when there was a loud bang on our door. The man was yelling.
I know you're in there. I saw you running. The people in there can't protect you. No one can.
I shouted through the door that he needed to leave our property, and if he was smart, he'd get in his car and drive off. I told him we were on the phone with the police. The answer he gave us was the worst one I could ever hear. He says,
Go ahead, call the police. I don't care. They won't be here in time.
After that, we got several loud bangs on the door, over and over. The woman was freaking out and crying and saying help me over and over. I ran to the kitchen to get a large knife just in case. We had a huge solid iron door, but our windows were easily breakable. If he wanted to get in badly enough, he certainly could. My husband just came from our bedroom with his gun when a squad car pulled up in the yard. 2 more following behind it, and one across the street where his car was. He took off on foot running. They tended to the woman and got her home safely. As it turns out, she lives across the highway from us 5 houses to the left. It had been 2 hours later and they still hadn't found him. There's a lot of places for him to hide in these woods, so he really could have been anywhere. I just really hope and pray that he hides far away from here, and hopefully we never see him ever again. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know I haven't posted in a while, but I'm back and I'm ready to get back into the grind. Just been dealing with some personal things, but yeah, I'm back. But anyways, if any of you have your own personal scary story that you'd like to share with me to be in a video, be sure to send that story to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. And before we bring this video to a close, I'd like to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Celeste S, Ellie S, Heather B, Howard R, Jacqueline W, Jazzy G, Jess, Jonathan C, Jonas B, Carrie F, Lori J, Lindsay S, Matthew B, Random Randy, Steph L, Tammy S, and Terry H. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Have a good one, everyone. And remember to always stay